everyone. My name is Miguel Myers. Welcome to My Horror Confessional, where every week I will have a guest come on and talk about one classic horror movie that they haven't seen and why. We'll discuss the movie, the actors, and probably get off topic quite a bit. Once I believe that they have properly atoned, I will absolve them of their horror movie sin. Today, we have Jamie Stewart, author of Mr. Jones, Insular, Trick or Treat, Alfie and the Dead Girls, and the recently released Price Manor, The House That Bleeds, which is part of an ongoing series of horror novellas where each one is written by a different author. Jamie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Maybe you could tell me a little bit about the book that you just released, Price Manor.
Sure, certainly. Price Manor, it's a gothic haunted house story with modern sensibilities. It's the second in a series referred to as the Price Manor series, though you don't have to read the first one to read mine or the third one or whatever. You can read them in order if you want, or you can read them completely standalone. That's kind of the beauty of it. This group of horror writers came together with the idea of doing like a haunted house series where the house can be anywhere in time, anywhere in human history, and basically run with it. And so mine is set in Russia in the 19th century. It's about a priest who is part of this very isolated community in very remote part of Russia who has to then investigate this supernatural occurrence of this house that has just suddenly appeared on the outskirts of their town, having never had anything built in that area before. And he discovers not only is it haunted, but the haunting itself allows him to he utilizes it to take revenge on the people in the community that have warped and manipulated his life through years and years and years. So it's a nice, bloody, really bloody revenge story.
So is it basically like an extended universe with all these stories? And how many of them have been written so far?
So the first one that came out was The House That Burns from Mike Salt, and then mine is the second, and the third one is going to come out by the end of this month, called The House That Falls by J. Alexander. So far, I think there's going to be 10 in the series. But we have it open to, there was originally 7 authors engaged in it, and if you look closely in mine, there's a wee Easter egg in mine that has all the last names of all the authors that will be in it, at least in the first 7. And we came together and just decided to do this, last year, and but we hope to keep it going. We hope people will come to us with their ideas of how to sort of like, I have an idea for this sort of house that can be anywhere in time and can have any subject matter, and just go with it. So that's what we're hoping.
Nice. It's a really cool concept. That was recently released, right?
Yeah,
Within the last
that came out in
couple
February
months or so.
11th. Yeah.
So are you working on anything new?
I have a novel coming out this June called Montague's Carnival of Delights and Terror. It's kind of it's set in the 80s, and it's kind of like a mishmash of Gone Girl, Salem's Lot, and Something Wicked This Way Comes. And it's my love letter to the books that were the big horror tombstone books, I call those big, thick, massive books that had sprawling storylines that were published in the 70s and the 80s that unfortunately we don't seem to get anymore. Horror fiction right now seems to be, more slim volumes, novellas and things like that. And I as much as I love them, I love the sort of immersive feeling of having a big, thick book to go through, and this idea that you don't just get one character, but a community of characters to enjoy and invest in. So it's coming out on June 3rd.
Oh, great! It's got a vampire in it, right? Is that what I heard you say?
Well, I don't want to say that because it might spoil.
Okay.
But the thing is, I keep saying it's influenced by Salem's Lot. So the first half of the book works like Gone Girl. The second half of the book works like a completely bananas vampire novel, which I love.
Okay. I asked that because when we were talking, you mentioned you had this new book coming out that made you think of Fright Night. So that's
Yeah.
Okay. So what I typically do here is I ask my guests what their history with horror was. Mm-hmm. Like, did you grow up liking it? Did you grow up hating it? Your family's life around it, like, did they allow you to watch it? Your friend circle, that sort of thing. Just overall, like, what your history is with horror.
My history with horror is I actually avoided horror films because I had this really interesting, maybe not interesting is the wrong word, but I had an experience when I was about 9 when I watched the Brendan Fraser Mummy film, which is, it's not like, it's not known as the scariest film of all time, but to a 9-year-old kid, I was absolutely terrified. I just shat myself over that film. There's particularly the bugs in it that consume flesh, and I was afterwards sitting in my bed thinking of all these creepy crawlies crawling up the sides of my bed to devour me, and it just terrified me. So from that point onward, I didn't watch or invest in horror films. But the weird thing about my horror journey was I wrote them. I played the video game Resident Evil 3, and I really enjoyed the zombie sort of thing, and that got me into sort of creatures and stuff, and zombies and vampires and things. And then I found Stephen King's The Shining at 13, and the rest is history. I devoured that book, and I remember sort of reading that book and it being like a mind expanding sort of experience, because the character in it, like of Jack Torrance, who's the father in that book, and spoilers, is also sort of the bad guy. The idea that he's a bad guy but he loves his family was sort of, to a 13-year-old, was kind of like, I'm used to stories where the bad guy's the bad guy and the good guy's the good guy and there's no gray. And this idea that there's this family that are the center of the story, that is very much loved and loved by the man that eventually tries to slaughter them. I wanted to experience that feeling in my own writing, because I was writing at the time. I've been writing since I was about 9 years old, and I read The Shining. It's like, I want to write a book like that, and I want to read more books like that. So I just started reading everything by Stephen King. I started reading everything by the authors that influenced him: Shirley Jackson, Ray Bradbury, Richard Matheson. And then I kind of avoided horror films because I'd always had that trepidation of what I've experienced when I was a kid. So, like, even though I was reading the Stephen King books, I never watched any of the films until maybe I was an adult. And that's kind of my journey in horror. And now, as an adult in my
Okay.
30s, I'm now enjoying the horror films. I'm now getting into them.
That's pretty cool. You said The Shining. I saw you had a blog post recently on The Shining, the book,
Yeah.
right? So is that, would you say that that's like your top tier horror book that you go back to?
I read that book about 6 times. I would absolutely say yes. That wee blog post was sort of like,
Yeah.
I wrote that in the Stanley Hotel. I ended up visiting there with my wife and staying the night, which is where that book was inspired by. And I just thought of how King has influenced
Yeah.
my life and set me on this trajectory, because I didn't read books before King. That's the thing, you're asking me my journey with horror. I wasn't a reader. I'd started to write fiction, but I just didn't read any books. I could pick them up. I could pick up a Goosebumps book or a Harry Potter, and I couldn't finish it. I'd get past chapter one and be like, I'd rather go out and play football. But Stephen King's The Shining sat me in a chair and stuck me to that chair, and I couldn't leave the pages of that book for the summer that I read it in, and I loved it. So yeah, I owe a lot to him, because I wouldn't be talking to you without him, or releasing books without the stuff that he's written. And there's other horror figures and
Yeah.
horror books that mean just as much to me now, but he was the one that got me as a reader and also a fan of the genre.
So how, I know you said that you didn't start watching horror movies until like in adulthood, but as far as your family life, when you started reading horror or Stephen King at 13, did your family support that, or were they like, "Why are you reading that trash"?
Oh,
How about your friend group? Did your friends also read it? That sort of thing.
that's kind of the interesting thing, because like I was thinking about it today, as a 30, almost 32-year-old. It's like, I read Carrie at 13, a 13-year-old boy who had no idea about female puberty or anything like that, and gone through. And my parents were completely supportive of it, because I think they wanted me to read. My mum was always trying to get me to read and invest in books, but I just couldn't find the right one. And they're readers too. My father had read all the Stephen Kings when he was my age, and he wanted me to read them, and we would sit and have long conversations about them and stuff, and still do to this day. So they were very supportive. But in terms of friends, no, like I had a friend, the friend that I used to play Resident Evil with, he had all the Goosebumps books, pristine, never read them once,
Uh-huh.
just sat on a shelf gathering dust. And I was
Huh.
just like, that's just such a waste, man. There's like worlds in these books that you have, that would expand your mind, and you would love them. But he's, no, just like, I like the look of them, I like the covers.
Yeah, I was about to ask you, is it just the covers he likes? Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, he still has them. I wouldn't say he's a hoarder, but he's a collector. Certainly has, he has them all up in his parents' attic, pristine condition.
So going into your adulthood, was there a time or a particular movie that you were like, okay, I can see myself starting to like these horror movies, or are you still kind of reticent to even watch a lot of them?
So, well, Shaun of the Dead was probably a gateway into that. because it had that sort of comedic
Okay.
idea, but it had the sort of overtone of horror in it. And then I think John Carpenter's Thing was a big kind of gateway into that world. I found that the older horror films were better made, and I could experience them in a way that, because the old settings in the 1980s kind of film style, I could also sort of not feel as tense as, say, watching something like Insidious or The Conjuring. So yeah, The Thing was a big one that sort of made me sort of try and get into them. And now I have a list of horror films and films in general that, the classic films that I would like to watch. Recently rewatched Crimson Peak, as I was saying to you the other day, and I hadn't seen that since it came out in the cinema, and I just that film blew me away. That is a fantastic film.
As you're kind of falling into like this newfound love for horror movies,
Hmm.
do you find yourself attracted to one genre or one aesthetic more than the other? Like, do you like, you said Shaun of the Dead, so do you like zombie films more than like slashers or vampire flicks, or do you just kind of like it all?
I love zombie films. Absolutely, I think it's really strange that that consistently stays with me. I was 8 years old when I was playing Resident Evil, and I fell in love with the zombie genre, and I've always loved it. From 28 Days Later to the remake of Crazies, I actually quite like a bit. To the Romero's Dawn of the Dead, to the Night of the Dead, the Return of the Living Dead. I love all those zombie films. So anytime there's like, say, zombie in a title, I'm there for it. But um in terms of I love the sort of 80s aesthetic. Yeah, asked like what aesthetic do I like? I like those 80s, those like Fright Night, for example. It's very much an 80s film and feels like it, at least the original does. And I love that kind of the vibe of those type of films and stuff, the sort of tongue in cheek of it, like Lost Boys, where there's that quote at the end of Lost Boys where the character goes, "Sure, that town's full of fucking vampires," and it's sort of it doesn't take itself too seriously, but at the same time, when the kills are happening, the blood's gushing, it's serious, So I love that 80s vibe, and that's something that
Yeah.
it's actually something in a project that that I'm working on right now that I want to enjoy the and embellishing the novella that's come there, the novel that's coming out, Montague. It's very much a serious story, even though it's set in the 80s. But I want to sort of embellish and go in that kind of campy kind of horror that existed in that period that I really sort of enjoy.
Have you, since you started watching more horror movies, have you noticed any difference in what you were writing? Because I do know people who love to write horror movies. Oh, I'm sorry, love to write in the horror genre, but just do not have time for whatever reason to watch a lot of horror films, and that's fine. And then they're able to do what they do great, in a great way. And I'm just interested in if you've seen a change in your writing from when you started watching more horror movies.
Not in terms of like inspiration, in terms of like I want to do this type of thing, but more in terms of perspective. I feel like very much that my writing style is very visual, and that when I'm in that zone when I'm writing, I like to think of myself as, where is the camera in this scene? Where is the perspective of these characters? Even though you're getting internal monologues and dialogue sort of thing. Um, so I've always been a visual kind of writer. So I've always been sort of um, taking stuff from films and stuff. And it doesn't. Most of the stuff I take is actually not from the horror genre, because, as I say, I'm not that familiar with the horror film genre. So like there's wee bits in Price of Manor that, yeah, you're obviously inspired by Stanley Kubrick's The Shining and Crimson Peak, but there's other wee bits that I could see and pick from other films that aren't scary at all. But that's just sort of how my process is.
So today, you've come on to confess to your horror sin of never having watched the original Fright Night from 1985. Is that correct?
Yes, and I'm going to add even more to the guilt of that I've seen the remake first.
Okay. All right. That's the end of the show. I can't do this anymore. I remember watching the remake, and I think it was fine. I don't really have any negative memories of that one. Do you remember if you liked that one?
Well, actually, the thing was, I do remember watching it, and the funny that this whole process came because I saw your Twitter. You posted about the interview you did with Lauren Hightower, and I had just watched the remake again just because it was on Netflix or something, and I just decided I remember seeing this and thinking it was okay, and I watched it and really enjoyed it, and it reunited the sort of the aspiration to watch the original. And then I saw your podcast, and I was like, I have to ask this, I have to ask this guy, can I come on? And because I'm so behind on my horror films. Like as I said, I haven't even seen the original Halloween. So that's another confession for you.
Okay.
So yeah,
Okay. And that one's got that stars the remake stars Anton Yelchin and like such a great actor that passed away so young. But I remember liking that one. So, but
yeah.
anyway, we're here to talk about the original from
Hmm.
1985. My question to you is, and I think I already know the answer based on what we've already been talking about, but why do you think this particular movie passed you by? Because I know that you haven't watched a lot of horror
Hmm.
films, but you have watched
Hmm.
some, and so I was just wondering why this one kept getting pushed down the list, which
Yeah.
happens.
Well, I think it's due to where I come from. I'm from Northern Ireland, which is a remote part of the UK. We're attached to Britain by governance. We're governed by Britain, but we're also part of the island that is Ireland itself. And there's a very heavy religious element here, and so back in those days when those films could be found in VHS and later DVD and stuff, you couldn't find them. You couldn't find, they weren't available because of the fact of their content. Like you would never find a copy of Evil Dead or Evil Dead 2 here. It was too much. You know, So-
So, are you talking about the video
yeah,
nasties?
the video nasties indeed. Even though Fright Night, I suppose, is
Okay,
not considered that, but just because of the nature of its thing, it's a young protagonist, and there's sort of this sort of play on sort of sex and going through puberty and experiencing the sort of early sort of sexual awakenings. No, that was a no go. So you couldn't find that. Like I didn't even know what John Carpenter's The Thing was. I got introduced to that at 18, and it was a friend, and he didn't know what it was, and he'd seen it, and he was like, there's this great film by someone who I've never heard of, and let's watch it. And it's about this. No clue, no clue. Of the history of all that stuff. I didn't even know there was a film adaptation of Stephen King's It until the recent one came out. The miniseries, because we just weren't told about those things.
which is funny because like, you say that it's like a super religious area, Northern
Mhm.
Ireland. This film actually has a very deeply religious like bend to it. Like you have to literally believe in Jesus and God and that whole stuff in order to save yourself. So it's like this is views the church in a positive light.
Yeah,
So I just find it funny that the movies that they reject or have issues with,
but they banned the reason they're banned. The people banned them without even seeing them. That's the thing. The
Yeah,
people that were banning them were not watching them. So it passed me
yeah.
by, absolutely. And the thing is, I think if I'd found it back when I was a teenager, I think I would have loved this film even more, because the premise is just so much fun. It's just so much what I would have loved and still love to watch and things like that. The idea of, just a normal teenage boy going through his life. Oh, and next door is a vampire.
I think yeah. Tom Holland, the director, wanted to do a vampire story crossbred with The Boy Who Cried Wolf, and I think he did exactly that. It's like it's a coming of age tale of this kid and going through puberty or that sort of stuff, but also nobody believes him when he tells them what's going on.
Yeah.
So all right, let's get into it. So this was written and directed by Tom
Mm-hmm.
Holland, who would go on to direct Child's Play and Thinner, among
Mm-hmm.
others, starring the legend Chris Sarandon, who was the vampire Jer Dandridge. He was also in Child's Play, The Princess Bride, and he was the voice of Jack Skellington in The Nightmare Before
Mm-hmm.
Christmas. William Ragsdale as Charlie Brewster. He was in Fright Night Part 2. And also, if you remember this early 90s Fox TV show called Herman's Head,
No.
did you ever, oh, probably no, yeah, okay. We're going to have different reference points, but that's fine. Amanda Beers as Amy Peterson. She was Marcy Darcy in Married with Children. And she's also in another upcoming film called Tapawingo, which sounds really interesting. Also starring Roddy McDowall as Peter Vincent, who the name came from the
Vincent Price.
horror actors Peter Cushing and Vincent Price. So I thought that was a really
Yeah.
nice connection there. And he was in Planet of the Apes and The Legend of Hell House, which is one of my favorites.
Mhm.
And then the MVP of the movie, I think, Stephen Jeffries as Evil Ed, who was from 976 Evil, another movie called The Chair, and also he ended up doing a lot of gay pornography in the 90s under the pseudonym Sam Ritter and Stephen Bordeaux.
All right.
And then the visual effects were done by a company called Entertainment Effects Group, who had just come off doing the effects for Ghostbusters.
Right.
So you could see a lot of because their effects were great. I mean,
Their
they
effects
spent
were
a
great.
substantial amount of their budget. I think, yeah, they spent about $1 million of their $9 million budget, I believe, just on the special effects, and it shows here.
I was going
So
to
it's
say,
great.
do you know if they were influenced at all by American Werewolf in London in terms of because there's a scene in that where which happens to Ed, which feels very much similar to the transformation of the werewolf in that film.
Yeah, it looks really cool. Well, an American Werewolf in London, right, is amazing. That transformation is one of the best transformations of all time. Here, they didn't do quite that. They did like a child's version, like a Happy Meal version of it, just like, but it was still great. Yeah, I'm sure they were. There's no way you
Yes.
couldn't be. So Tom Holland, he was originally an actor turned screenwriter turned director, and he actually wrote the scripts for Class of 1984, Cycle 2, and when it came time to direct this movie, to find a director for Fright Night, he said he wanted to direct it, and the studio took a chance on him, which I thought was really cool. So, Charlie Brewster is a normal, average teenager living with his divorced mother in an unnamed suburban township. One evening, while making out with his girlfriend Amy in his bedroom, Charlie looks out of the window and sees his neighbors moving in next door, and they appear to be carrying what looks like a coffin. Intrigued with his new neighbors, Charlie begins to spy on them. Amy leaves in anger as she was waiting for him in bed, ready to have sex with him for the first time. So one thing that I wanted to mention is it has been said that there's a lot of gay subtext in this movie, and I'm
Hmm.
not sure if you picked up on it. I am a straight cis male, so I didn't pick up on it. Well, I picked up on a little bit, but I didn't pick up on it too much.
No, I picked up on it, especially between Jerry and his. I can't remember the name of the character that played his kind of Renfield like character, but I definitely felt that there was sort of overtones there. It was never really explained their relationship, and quite well, I thought, for not explaining it. It's just sort of it's there.
So I ended up listening to this episode, the Fright Night episode of the podcast called Horror Queers, where they're going over this movie, and there they had these two gay guys, and they had another guest who I believe was or is a drag queen, and they were talking about all the gay subtext that they found in the movie, and it was really eye opening. But the first incident of that is when Charlie leaves or stops making out with his girlfriend and is like is able to have sex with her, but stops that to go look at two men with his binoculars.
Hmm.
And so they're saying that could be something there. So I just thought that was interesting, and I'll bring while we're talking, I'll bring out some of this the more times where they thought there was some gay subtext there.
Hmm.
But also just to bring up before I forget, the cast of this movie was had a lot of gay people or gay representation. So Amanda Bierce wasn't an out lesbian, I don't believe, at the time that this movie came out, but she did come out like in '94, I believe. And then Roddy McDowall was also an out gay man in Hollywood. And then Stephen Jeffries was also a gay man in Hollywood. So there's like three main characters in this movie or supporting characters in this movie that were gay. So whereas something like they were even talking about it on the podcast, something like have you seen Nightmare on Elm Street 2?
No.
So the Nightmare on Elm Street 2 is supposed to be like quote unquote the gayest movie ever made. There's a lot of overt or when you say gay subtext there, it's there, but it's treated as if being gay is bad. And when it came out, that's probably the overwhelming feeling in society. But with this movie, it's not treated as such. It's just treated as what people are, and I thought that was kind of cool
Yeah, I
and
agree.
like a positive reflection of that.
Mm. I agree, and I always sort of curious about that scene, as you said, where he's gazing out with his binoculars, and obviously he has his girlfriend's there that he's been with for a while, and they haven't had sex yet, and they're about to do it, and he's sort of so absorbed with what's going on that he doesn't even notice when she leaves the room, actually, which I thought was really good. But it's there is obviously the gay subtext there. There's two men walking in the house, but there's also they're carrying a coffin. So if it's a sexual link there, how depraved is he if he's getting if he's turned on by a coffin moving next door?
Yeah, and we're actually introduced to Charlie, and I don't end up liking him at the very beginning because he is pressuring his girlfriend into having sex when she's not ready.
I had to stop the film at that point. I completely agree with you because he was such an asshole, and I thought, this is really weird for your main character, your film, to introduce him in such a way that he's an asshole and a pressuring asshole on his girlfriend. I actually took my dog out for a walk and came back and started the film after that scene. So because I thought, oh, this is maybe a bad film to choose from that, because it's not so much you've seen in countless films where a guy and a girl or a couple are making out, and somebody is maybe being a bit more forward than the other partner is, and you're used to the sort of thing of no, and the no is kind of taken, well. This isn't. He walks away and he says, we've been together for a year or something like that, which I find a bit rough in terms of just sort of, this is your main character. It doesn't really come across as likable.
Yeah, and in a later scene, she apologizes for being, for acting that way, and he's like, "Oh, it was your fault." Oh, okay. Like he never takes responsibility, and then we just move past it.
Yeah,
It was a different time, but it just sucks to see that in a main
yeah.
character.
I posted on Twitter after having seen the film a controversial opinion that I actually like the remake better for this reason, because I felt like the from that get go you're kind of put on the back foot with Charlie as a character. You don't really like him, and he's an interesting character, I think, throughout this whole film, because he's very ineffective.
Yeah, he. I don't know if he ever fully wins my respect
Mhm.
back after this, after the way he treats his girlfriend, but he is what we have. So intrigued with his new neighbors, Charlie begins to spy on them, and then Amy leaves in anger as she was ready to have sex with him for the first time. So the next day, a young woman who appears to be a sex worker shows up at Charlie's house by accident looking for another address, and Charlie directs her next door, which as she goes to the new neighbor's house. The next morning at school, while trying to reconcile with Amy, Charlie becomes distracted by a news broadcast about the police finding another murder victim from an unknown serial killer who decapitates female victims and drains the bodies of blood. So Amy, upset at Charlie's disrespect, yanks a poor innocent bystander's fully loaded hamburger and smushes it into Charlie's face. This is when we first see Evil Ed as he cackles, and we get the famous line. I can't say it. I can't even do it justice, but I'll say it. "Oh, you're so cool, Brewster," as Evil Ed wipes condiments off of Charlie's face. So I think Evil Ed is one of my favorite characters from a horror film in a while. Like he's so much fun. What
Yeah.
did you think when you first saw Evil Ed?
I recognized him, but I don't know where I recognized him from. And I felt like, is he one of those characters or one of those actors that's very prominent in the '80s films and '80s films like that? I was wondering when it was going, because when they were going to have his friendship group come into the film, because my kind of template is the 2011 film, and there's obviously in that the beginning of that film he has sort of a group of friends that he's no longer friends with, which is again strange. And even in the remake they kind of portray Charlie as kind of a dickhead, and it seems to be that that's the kind of, because he's got this friendship in the remake of or has this friendship with these friends, and he's no longer with them because they're nerds and they're seen as nerdy, and that's not popular. And he's now got a popular girlfriend that's attracted to him, so he can't be with those. So my context of him was I was waiting for the friendship group to come, and he doesn't have a great friendship group. He just has Ed, which I think is great. He's just sort of, he really adds another dimension and sort of sarcasm to the film that was much needed.
Yeah, he's like pure camp, like hamming it up for the camera, which I loved. Yeah, I loved everything about him. Even when later on, when he becomes a villain, I'm still like, hell yeah, like I'm here for it, you know?
Yeah, his villain and his when he gets burned with a cross, that makeup looks so good. It looks so cool.
Yeah. Even like when in his dying scene, like it's very emotional, and we'll get to that. I want to talk about it more there, but I think he was a good actor. Like he had a range of
Yeah.
emotions in this film. All right, so the next night, Charlie, suspecting something sinister about his new neighbors, spies in the house next door and sees Jerry Dandridge biting the neck of a young teenage girl. He tells his mother what he saw, but she passes it off as Charlie's imagination.
Mhm.
Charlie tries to tell his friend, Evil Ed, and his girlfriend, Amy, but neither of them believe him and begin to worry about Charlie's mental well being. A day later, Charlie calls the police with information about one of the murder victims, and a detective accompanies him to the house where they meet Billy Cole, who is Jerry Dandridge's quote unquote roommate, who lets them in and shows them around the house. Finding nothing, the detective decides to leave, but Charlie tells him to check the basement, telling the detective that Jerry Dandridge is a vampire. The detective forces Charlie to leave with him and tells him not to ever call on him again, thinking that Charlie has an overactive imagination. So I love this scene because like the detective is like 100% there with Charlie. Like he walks in there with like his chest out. He's like, "Yo, you're like we're official police business." And then he doesn't find anything. And then once Charlie brings up vampire, he's like, "What the fuck are you talking
Yeah.
about? Are you crazy?" And he's like embarrassed. He's like, "I can't believe I came out here with this kid."
Yeah. He took a chance. Like, there's so many films where you would see where the police would not believe a teenager, and it doesn't do that in this film. The cop comes and follows because he believes him, because he's saying, somebody's murdering. It's not a vampire at the initial stages. But then when that happens, and when he says the truth of what he actually thinks is going on, you can tell that the police officer is like, "I took a chance on you, mate, and now, you're just another nut job. See you later." Also really like the sets, the sets in this film. There's something about them because we're so used to green screen now, and it's so nice to see an actual set where things are actually filmed in, and the house itself. I wish there was more scenes inside the house, because it just looks so cool and creepy and sort of ornate.
Okay, let's talk about this house for a second here. The house is beautiful on the inside and outside. It's falling down and decrepit, but it makes absolutely no sense that it's even in this suburb.
No, it does not make any sense that it's in this suburb at all. That's another thing I was going to say. If you call it on, it's like it's been transported from Pennsylvania. you know,
from from Transylvania. Yeah, that's the thing. Like we see the interior of Charlie's house, and it looks like a random suburb in
yeah,
America, like a suburban house in America. And then we see the inside of this house, and it's like the Adams family house. It's like what it makes no sense
yeah,
whatsoever. So I love that part. That was
yeah, and
great.
it's not like he built the house. The house has existed there, derelict.
Right, they
It's
moved
not like
in.
the vampire came and made his specific, architecture design. No, it's always existed next door.
And like I just love the fact that the vampire's name is Jer. Like they
yeah,
call him Jer in the movie, and it's just a vampire named Jer just makes so much. It just makes me happy. You know. But I did want to back up and say that the detective was played by Art Evans, who is, you don't see a lot of people of color or black people getting roles in 80s horror. So I always want to point that out. We do have two black people later on in the movie, but I think they have one line and they're dispatched very quickly. But it was nice to see Art Evans in this role
I
here
recognize him
as the
from
detective.
films and I don't know where it is, but I think again he played a police officer. Could be right. And for some
Okay.
reason, I wanted to say Die Hard, and I know that's not correct, but like something in that vein.
Well, he was in Die Hard
Ah,
too. So maybe that's
yeah,
what you're
that's
getting
me.
at. So Charlie seeks advice from Ed, but sometimes he calls him he's got a
Mhm.
nickname, Evil, which he doesn't like. And I don't know if they're friends or not because Ed tells him not to call him Evil, and he still calls him Evil. So I don't know if he's like they have some sort of frenemy thing going on or whatever, but he just barges into his
Mhm.
house like when he's seeking his help, Oh, let me back up a little bit. So after the cop leaves and doesn't believe him, um, Charlie looks at his watch and it's like 4:45, and then he goes out and he sees that what's the guy's name? Billy is looking down at him like we're gonna
Yeah.
get you. So he realizes, oh shit, as soon as the sun goes down, I'm dead. So that's why he runs over to Evil's house, Evil
Hmm.
Ed, and begs him for advice because apparently it's not stated, but based on this conversation, Evil Ed is kind of like a horror nerd. He's
Yeah.
us, He's a horror geek. He likes horror movies, and um, so he asks him for some advice on how to fight vampires, and he offers up $8, and so that's enough, right? And so Evil Ed tells him from watching movies and documentaries about vampires that they're super strong, have no heartbeat or pulse, have vulnerabilities to holy water and crosses. They cast no reflection in a mirror and they can only be killed by fire, decapitation, sunlight, or a wooden stake through the heart. Ed also tells Charlie that a vampire cannot enter a person's home without an invitation from the rightful
Yeah.
owner. And, and Charlie is very pleased with that. He's like, okay, good. I'm good. Because I'm not going to invite him into my house at all.
Yeah. That's what I like about this film. It goes pedal to the metal. Like it's there's not a lot of time before the action picks up or kicks in or the story kicks in. Whereas I feel modern day films have sort of a lull in the beginning where they don't really their wheels are spinning to get to the story. But this film just sort of starts and it goes. There's no sort of like pause or even hesitance about Charlie believing his neighbor next door is a vampire. It's just like, oh no, he's a vampire.
Yeah, there's no try and fail cycles here. It's just like this is what it is, and we're just down for the
Yeah.
ride. One of the other things I wanted to say about Chris Sarandon as Jerry Dandridge is like he's an updated vampire. He's not rocking the cape and he's not rocking the frilled shirt or anything like that. Like he's in cable knit sweaters and like really cool
Trench coats.
what are those called? Trench coats, right? Yeah, trench coats, and like he's not overdoing it. Like I feel like so the thing about the Lost Boys one of the things I didn't like, I like Lost Boys. It's a great movie, but one of the things I didn't like about it was it felt like they were very try hard. Like, look how cool I
Hmm.
am, like leather jacket and earrings. Oh wow, and that's a certain aesthetic, and that was in the '80s, and I understand that. But like Jer has this like cool, calm, collected vibe to him. He's just a cool dude that you wanted to hang
Yeah,
out
you
with,
could tell that he's trying to even the name Jerry, which I would be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if it wasn't his real name. It's sort of like something he took on to appear normal and inviting. Nobody thinks a vampire is going to be
Yeah.
called Jerry, and nobody's going to think that a vampire is going to dress the way he does. He fits in. As you say, he's not got a cape and cowl and all the stuff that he's floating around in. He's very much like a modern day member of society. So it works in the context of the film, and it makes you sort of wonder why the other films like it don't do that as much. Because the whole premise is he's trying to invite you in because then he wants to bite your neck and suck your blood. So of course he's got to look attractive and modern. You know?
Yeah, and also like you said a little bit to fit
Mhm.
in or to
Yeah.
blend in. So I really appreciated that about the character of Jerry Anderson. And again, a vampire named Jerry is just great. So Charlie then goes home and starts nailing his windows shut, but he's secure in the fact that he's safe because he's not going to be inviting Jerry Dandridge into his home. But then his mother calls him down and finds that Jerry Dandridge is in his living room waiting for him. His mother invited him in for a drink, which just happened. Did you notice what drink
It
they
was
were
wine,
drinking?
wasn't it? Red wine. Oh,
Bloody
Bloody Marys.
Marys.
Oh.
Yeah. So Dandridge is seemingly friendly and charming and kind of even flirting a little
Yeah.
bit with Mrs. Dandridge. And then he informs Charlie that now that he has been invited in, he can show up whenever he
Yeah.
likes. Of course, with your mother's approval. And she's like, oh, okay, cool. And then he says, very cryptically, he says, I'll see you, Charlie, dot, dot,
Yeah.
dot, soon. And like Charlie is like terrified and like runs upstairs with it. So I love this like playful nature he has because Jerry could kill both of them right now,
Yeah.
right? But he doesn't.
Yeah, he doesn't, and it's curious why. I don't know why, but it's also this sort of like there is no doubt. Jerry knows that he knows,
Yeah.
and there is no doubt in Charlie's side that Jerry's a vampire, which I like. There would be sort of this overcomplicated plot of is he, isn't he, if it was written now.
Yeah, that's true. I like that they just laid it out on the table. They both
Yeah.
know, you know.
Like I said, it just pushes the action forward. It just pushes the story. There's sort of like where there is it seems from the get go there is a confrontation that's going to happen between Jerry and Charlie, and that confrontation is just we're heading straight for it.
Which is, I like that you say that because it's a very fast paced movie, but it's also an hour
Hmm.
46. It's an hour 46 minutes long. And we're only like 20, 25 minutes
Yeah.
into it. He already knows there's a vampire, that his neighbor's a vampire. The neighbor already knows that he knows. And we're 25 minutes into this movie. It's great. I love it. So that evening, Charlie begins to fortify his house, knowing that Dandridge can enter whenever he feels like it. However, Dandridge enters the house through Mrs. Brewster's window, and as he leaves her room, there's this really cool
Yeah.
shot. Did you
Oh,
notice the shot of when he's
yeah.
leaving? Do you want to mention? Do
Well,
you want to describe what happens?
I was I'm thinking of when he breaks the door in the frame. Is that what
Oh, okay, but yes, but right before that, and the director was mad because he says a lot of people didn't notice this, and perhaps
I
you
didn't? I
didn't.
didn't. Go ahead, tell me.
As he's opening the door, he's standing in front of a mirror and he's casting no reflection. So the door just opens and we see him open it, but in the door there's no reflection, and then it closes and we see him walk out, but we don't see that in
You
the.
got
So I thought that was a real
that's
cool
cool.
shot.
I did not notice that. I will admit to that. So I didn't notice that. That's cool that you noticed that.
Yeah, and the director has said that too. Like we spent a lot of time in that shot, and he says that he framed it incorrectly because a lot of people didn't notice it. But I noticed it watching it yesterday. I was like, wow, that's really cool. So then he hides in a closet in Charlie's bedroom. So here's a little bit of a wink, wink, nudge, nudge to the gay
Hmm.
subtext. He's hiding in a closet, and later when they're fighting, he throws Charlie into
Into
the
the closet
closet.
too.
So yeah. When Charlie gets ready for bed, Dandridge surprises him and threatens to kill him for snooping around and nearly revealing his secret that he is indeed a vampire. When Dandridge tries to choke Charlie to death, Charlie stabs the vampire in his hand with a pencil. I thought this was a really cool scene, and he's like wounded and angry. Jerry like terrorizes Charlie by revealing his like true his vampiric
Hmm.
form, complete with red eyes, fangs, like really long claws, and like a roaring wolf like rage. And he actually pulls out the knife, and that was a real cool
Yeah.
effect. Like these practical effects, that's what I love about 80s movies and 70s movies is there's no CGI. It's all practical effects, and it looks so great.
I wonder
It
if
looks
the wooden
amazing.
pencil affected him so much because it's like because there's this thing of the stakes have to meet. There's certain theories that stakes have to be made of ash, that type of wood. And I
Okay.
was wondering whether that's because it seems like an overreaction to something that's the superior bearing. Because as that scene unfolds, you're quite clearly aware that Jerry is so strong, because everything Charlie does is just like he's just flipping him about the room, and then he just gets
Uh-huh.
a pencil in the hand, which yeah would be painful, but I imagine for sort of a creature of that nature, it wouldn't have been as much. So I'm kind of wondering whether that was sort of why it affected him so much, because not only does it hurt him, he stops doing what he's doing enough, you know.
Yeah, that's right. I hadn't heard. I thought I didn't think of the particular wood. I just thought that it was wood going into his body, like a stake through his heart. But obviously not. The stake through his heart kills him, and I thought maybe just wood going in would affect him slightly lesser. But regardless, this transformation is a real cool
Yeah.
scene. I like that part of it. And what is funny is like you're saying, when he exited Mrs. Dandridge's bedroom, he like pushed it all the way so it would
Yeah.
jam, because he didn't want to wake her up, or when he goes into um, Charlie's room, he's like, we wouldn't want to wake up your mother. Let's be quiet. But then, like you said, he proceeds to like throw him around the room like a rag
Yeah.
doll, making all this noise, And in the end, he does end up waking Mrs. Dandridge up, and so she's like yelling and trying to get out of her room, and that's why he leaves, because she wakes up.
Which again,
So,
he could totally easily kill those two people. And my idea is that the reason why he doesn't is because it's his neighbors. He's picking up these random people and draining them of blood and cutting their heads off, and that's all on the news. But it would be directly linked to him as being close to him, so maybe that's why he doesn't kill them, outright there and then.
and then I have to go back a little bit. There was also a scene where where they were removing bodies from the house, and he saw them doing so, and he like goes into a bush to
Yeah.
like spy on them while they're doing that. And then like his mom comes and calls him, and that's also like gay subtext because like it's like hiding in the
Hmm.
bush, or also like he's like cruising for men because he's hiding in the bush and he's looking at two other men. It's like stuff
Well,
like that,
he's also a
Um,
younger man, perhaps not yet, aware, maybe not yet um, accepted that part of himself, and he's viewing these two older men who perhaps have, because clearly they're because there is sort of, I wouldn't even say it's contacts with them two. I do think they're in a relationship because there's a difference between how Charlie reacts to the women that he has victims and to the person that he lives with, and it's sort of a very different sort
mhm.
of way. They're very much women are prey, but he has sort of an affection for the person that he lives with because, well, we'll get to the point where that happens. But you know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So Dandridge flees and threatens to kill Charlie tomorrow night. So the next morning, Charlie then seeks out the help of his favorite vampire killer, Peter Vincent, who is a former actor who hosts TV segments of horror movies that Charlie watches, and he also claims to be a real vampire
mhm.
hunter. So I have a question for you. Are you familiar with these kind of hosts? Like, did they have these in the UK? Like we have Elvira I'm from Chicago, and so we had Svengoolie. He did this sort of thing. Did you guys have this sort of
Not at
thing where you
all.
grew
I
up?
mean, the closest thing we would have would be that Alfred Hitchcock presents. Would he would come out and do sort of a small introduction to one of his films or something like that. So that's the sort of only time that we would have that.
Cool. Yeah, I was wondering about that because I remember growing up watching this guy Svengoolie in the Chicagoland area, and it was the silliest thing. But it just you just grow up with it. You always I didn't even realize it was just a Chicago thing until I started talking to people outside of the state, and they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So it's cool to have these local horror hosts,
Yeah.
and so that's what he's playing here is this local horror host. And then Charlie confronts Vincent at the studio where he works and tells him that his neighbor is a vampire and is going to kill him. And Vincent, of course, like everyone else, brushes off Charlie's claims as just an overeager teenager with an overactive imagination.
I really liked that actor that played Peter Vincent. I thought he was very good. He was sort of, there was a Sherlock Holmes element to him, and there was a sort of Van Helsing element to him, and then there was just sort of a Vincent Price element as well when he was on the TV.
Yeah, he's so charming as this vampire hunter. I love this character as well. Anyway, so then later on in the night or later on in the day, Evil Ed and Amy go visit Charlie at his house and find him secluded in his bedroom with crosses hanging everywhere and what seems like a like fire hazardous amounts of candles burning.
Yeah,
I don't know how he was breathing in that room.
I don't understand what the candles were about because what's that do to a vampire?
Yeah, nothing other than like what it would do to anybody else. Just burn them up. Makes no sense. But it looks
It
cool.
does.
So then Evil Ed and Amy hear him talk about Peter Vincent that he went to go see Peter and that they said he wasn't going to help him. So they decided to ask Charlie not to do anything until they have had a chance to talk to Peter Vincent. And so they go to talk to Mr. Vincent. They visit him at his apartment where they tell him about Charlie. And he says, "Oh yeah, I remember him. He's fucking bananas. He's crazy." And they say, "Please." He's like, "No, no, I'm not going to do it." And then they manage to persuade him with a $500 savings
Yeah.
bond, which I thought was great because he just lost his
Yeah.
job and he's being evicted from his apartment. So so they want him to help prove to Charlie that vampires don't exist. So what he does is he calls Dandridge at his house and asks if he can come over the next night with Charlie to debunk his theory that he's a vampire. And Jerry's completely fine. He's like, yeah, sure, no problem. I'm willing to do that. And he's like, could we bring some crosses? He's like, no,
Yeah.
I'm recently reformed, which is like, I don't know what that means. But, and then he says, can I bring holy water? He's like, absolutely not. He's like, it's not really going to be holy water. And he's like, oh, yeah, sure, no problem. I don't know. He should be throwing up some flags there. I
Absolutely
don't know
should
if
be
I
throwing
would be
some
like,
flags, but
so having agreed to that, they hatched a plan that they're going to bring Charlie over the next night. So the following evening, Vince and Charlie, Ed and Amy pay a visit to Dandridge's house, where Billy lets them in and introduces them to Jerry Dandridge. Vincent tries to show Charlie that Dandridge is not a vampire by having him drink a vial of quote unquote holy water, which he does. And I find it funny because uh, Chris Sarandon is so good at, like, in this scene, he's like, this isn't really holy
yeah,
water, right? Or like he looks at Mr. Vincent and he like gives him a look and he's like, yeah, go ahead. And then like he puts it like to the fire to see if like there would be some reaction. I wonder what kind of reaction that would be. I don't
no,
know. But yeah, then he ends up drinking it and obviously there's no
yeah.
issues.
And then he sees him in the mirror, which leads him to finally, and that look of panic on his face is just fantastic. So it is.
Yeah. But right before that, Charlie's not convinced and he confronts him with a cross. And Peter Vincent snatches it from him, snatches it from Charlie before they actually get a chance to see Jerry's reaction to the crucifix, which he was like, oh
Mhm.
shit. So then Charlie is still not convinced and says that crosses only work on vampires if a person has faith to use it. And the holy water that Dandridge just drank wasn't really holy water. So when they first walked in, Jerry notices Amy and like recognizes
Yeah.
her, right? And so that's going to come on later in the movie, but it's apparently like his one of his lost
Hmm.
loves, which apparently this plot thread or whatever, this idea came from Chris Sarandon. He was like, there should be a reason why he wants the girl later on in the
Yeah.
movie, and so he's like, maybe it's a lost love, and so they wrote this in.
I don't think
Um,
that's one plot subplot. I don't think works because he disposes of her so easily.
yeah, like he treats her like
Mm.
shit. Normally, when you see this in vampire movies where it's a long lost love, he like cherishes the woman or
Mhm.
whatever. In this case, like he's like playing with her like if she's like food or something,
Yeah,
you know?
and he leaves her for Charlie to, and you're sort of like Charlie could kill her. Like you don't really know what Charlie's going to do when he's at the end when they're locked in the room together, which I've sort of like made me think. Well, you don't really care about her that much then if you're willing for her to have that sort of potential to happen to her.
Right. So then, like we're saying, as they're walking out, Vincent pulls out his mirror and notices that Jerry casts no reflection in his small compact mirror. He gets scared and drops it. He gathers it up, but a shard of the mirror remained on the ground. So they leave, and then Mr. Vincent hurries to his car and drives away. And he explains to them that so Charlie's like, "What did you see? What did you see?" And Mr. Vincent is like, "He cast no reflection in the mirror, okay?" And then he left. So now he knows he's a vampire, but he's like, "Fuck these kids, I'm out," which I understand
Yeah.
completely. But back in the house, Dandridge is walking, and he walks on a shard, and he realizes it's a mirror. He's like, "Oh shit!" Now everybody knows I'm a
Mhm.
vampire. Then he like leaps into action.
Yeah.
Charlie, Amy, and Ed start. They walk away, and then for I, I don't know where Amy lives, but she must live in some industrial
Yes.
area because they're walking through like alleyways and dark streets. And Evil Ed is like, "Yeah, let's just take the shortcut." And then we look down, and it's like filled with fog and like no lights. And looks like the worst place to be at night. And he's like, "Yeah, let's just walk this way." And
Yeah.
why? You know, I just thought that was silly.
Yeah. It needed to be in there. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, I know. We needed to isolate them, which I get. It was just funny. So then Amy and Charlie walk one way through like an industrial complex of business buildings, and then Ed walks down down the alleyway. He starts to hear somebody following him, and he turns and he sees that it's Dandridge. So he runs down an alley, and it's getting darker, and then he's tossed. taking left and right, and there's a bunch of fog. And finally, he thinks he loses him, and he goes down one alleyway, and it ends in a dead end. And then that's when Dandridge appears. And it was actually a really touching line here. Dandridge appears and he wants Ed to become a vampire. And he says, "You don't have to be afraid of me. I know what it's like to be different. Only they won't pick on you anymore or beat you up. I'll see to that. All you have to do is take my hand. Here, Edward, take my hand." And then he ends up taking his hand. So it's a really touching moment. And this was also another part of the queer subtext or gay subtext that they were talking about is, so if you see the relationship between Jerry and Billy as to be like homosexual in nature, and then he's reaching out to Edward and say, "I know what it's like to be
Hmm.
different." So they're both gay, or he sees them as being gay, and he's like, "You'll be safe on my side." And Evil Ed starts crying because maybe that's what he was looking for. He just wanted to feel safe. It's a really touching moment in a movie that in this horror movie. And I just really enjoy it.
I also think like it's interesting because all his victims, the only one he turns are men, apart from Amy. But I think he does that for a vindictive reason. All the victims that he has previously are all women that are just like that's it. Their heads chopped off. They're dead. They're left for dead. But with Ed, it's like he has that moment of tenderness.
Yeah. So later at Peter Vincent's apartment, Peter huddles scared and tries to calm down from his fright. Just then, Evil Ed knocks on Peter Vincent's door and says, "Hurry up because there's vampires outside." So Peter Vincent opens the door and says, "Hurry in, sir, hurry in." And he opens it and he lets Evil Ed in, not knowing that he was just bitten by Jerry. And then Mr. Vincent asks Ed, "What are we going to do?" And then Evil says, what are you going to do?" And shows him the bites on his neck. And he's such a great, like, I've never seen in this sort of like, I don't remember him in other movies. So I don't know if he acts like this in other movies,
Hmm.
but the choices he made for this character are so fun. And he attacks Mr. Vincent, who protects himself by placing a cross on Evil Ed's head, which instantly burns him and causes Evil to retreat in pain.
Hmm.
And then a scalded Evil Ed sinks away, threatening Mr. Vincent with a mouthful of daggers by telling his master what he's done. So Ed's laughing in the scene is hysterical and creepy. And then, so you were talking earlier about that scene where
Yeah.
the cross goes on his forehead. It looks great, right?
It does look great, and the teeth look phenomenal. Like I said, like razor blades. It's like that's the nice thing about the vampires in this. They're not like two fangs, and they look quite pleasant, and the mouth is sort of all contorted and sort of a ruin of sort of fangs that are not really symmetrical, which I liked.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. And there's an even better like view of that later on in the movie that we'll get to. So
Mhm.
Charlie and Amy find that Dandridge has been following them, and he chases them to a local nightclub. Again, is this a small town? This is a suburb, but they have like clubs that
And
are
it's like
open till like
packed.
2 or 3 a.m. in the morning. That's packed, and they have to walk through an industrial area to get her home. Like, also, didn't she show up? She showed up on a scooter, right? So
Where's
where
that?
were they
Yeah.
before? Yeah, like why did she need to be walked home? It's a little some plot holes there, but anyway, Charlie. So they sneak into this really like dope ass club. It's got all these people are dancing, and then Charlie decides to call Peter Vincent to try to get him to come help them, but he refuses. While he's doing that, Amy has seen Dandridge on the dance floor,
Hmm.
and then it turns into like this 5 minute like dance scene with them.
Yeah, it's quite
Very
prolonged.
strange.
Yeah.
Yeah, it did. I mean, if we were talking about the runtime of an hour 47, some time could have been cut here. But he's like literally seducing her on the dance floor,
Hmm.
and like she's getting into it too, and it
And
was cool.
it's cool, but again, it's sort of a film of its time because in this film, Amy's a teenager, and there's some moves that he performs. I think he slides a hand up her dress and things like that, and you're just
Yeah.
like, yeah, you're sort of that wouldn't fly now, sort of
No,
thing.
she's playing a teenager, but she is 27 years old. But
Yeah,
still, while she's filming this, she's 27. But still, like me and my wife, when we were watching this, we're like, how old is she? Like,
yeah,
why is this happening? You
Yeah,
know?
and she doesn't look 27 in the film, obviously, because of the
No.
character.
Yeah,
So,
they even make her in the beginning. They have her in barrettes or hair ribbons,
hmm
like to make her to age her down even more.
hmm
And so it does feel weird when he's seducing this supposed teenager. You know. So he uses his vampire charm to hypnotize her and dance with him. When Charlie intervenes, Dandridge restrains him, and then those two bouncers appear. And then for some reason, Dandridge says "fuck it" and morphs into his red-eyed, like fanged vampire self and attacks both bouncers.
yeah,
Um, then Dandridge escapes from the nightclub in the confusion and chaos with Amy, and then Charlie runs out into the night, into the street, and he sees that they're in the back of his Jeep. I didn't realize that vampires drive Jeeps, and so they've gotten away with Amy, and he tells him to meet him later at his house or he's going to kill her. And as they're driving away, we see in the back of the Jeep Evil Ed, and he's like cackling and looking awesome.
yes, he's chewing scenery.
Yeah. Charlie runs back to Mr. Vincent, who makes him grab a cross before he enters his apartment to make sure that he's also not a vampire.
hmm
And then Charlie persuades Peter Vincent that they must confront Dandridge and kill him before the night is over. The duo gets ready and go to Jerry's house. By then, he has already turned Amy into a half vampire, and it's a really weird scene because he's he's changed her into a dress. Does he just have dresses on standby? Like, where did
Yeah,
this dress come from?
and
But
the
like,
scene where he changes her again, there's that tenderness that he has towards her, and then again, it's sort of, as I said later on, he's fine with Charlie being locked in a room with her, with the potential of Charlie killing her.
yeah. So I don't know. Yeah, the relationship between him and Amy has never been like fully. He never even says, "Oh, my long lost love. I've been searching for you for a decade or yeah or whatever." Nothing like that.
hmm
But I think some of that fast paced stuff that you were talking about, well, this is where that suffers a little bit because in all that fast pace, you don't have time to do a lot of character development.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
So as Charlie and Vincent enter the house, Dandridge appears on the top of the stairs and says in his best Peter Vincent impression, I'm going to try. Welcome to Fright Night. And he goes dot 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 like for real. And I just thought like Jerry has this flair for the dramatic, like this campiness that I
yeah,
really appreciate. So Peter Vincent hesitates for a moment, and his faith is too weak to keep Dandridge at bay with the cross that he's brung.
hmm
However, Charlie has faith, and the vampire cowers in fear from the crucifix. But Billy Cole comes to his master's aid and knocks Charlie off the staircase, rendering him unconscious.
hmm
So I want to talk about the set piece of this place. He's standing in front of this huge stained glass
yeah.
mural sort of thing, and it looks great. And they know it looks great because almost every scene in which they confront him is at the top of the stairs. You know?
Yeah, it's I was saying when I was watching it, I was saying to my wife, it felt like it was weirdly blocked. That term they used where they thing because I said I wanted to see more of the house, and it only felt like they had two sets of the house. They had this big massive hallway with the staircase and the glass, and then they had this one room where Amy is in, and you see either Charlie with her or Jerry with her. It kind of and there's sort of this sort of lack of economics or something like that. I feel is the way to describe it in terms of how they handle those scenes because there's a lot of walking about. There's a lot of characters go to this room and then go back to this place and then go back there to achieve this thing again, and it just feels very lengthy
Yeah,
in some ways.
yeah, and they also have the basement
Yeah,
set, which the basement is kind of blah. It's just like really dark with boxes and shit. But yeah, I would have liked to see more of the house.
especially because you would have a haunted house or vibe sort of thing of the idea. Going if you showed more. Of them like trying to find where this is and stuff. You could build up the tension there, but it's just immediate. He's on the staircase.
Yeah. So then Vincent panics and runs to Charlie's house, which I really like the character arc of Peter Vincent. Like he is reluctant as fuck to even help them, only helps them for the money. And then when he finds out that it's a real vampire, he scrams. And then like he's like he's a hesitant hero. He doesn't want to be a hero. Like
Yeah.
he wants to make sure that nothing happens to these kids, but like also he runs at the drop of a dime if he feels like he's in danger. I
Yeah, I
just
like
like that character arc.
he did he for me he saved the film for me because I really struggled with Charlie having the beginning scene, and then I found him so ineffective, as I said, throughout the film. And I know that's going to cause people maybe to be angry, but I just found like there's a scene in the club where Charlie tries to punch Jerry, and Jerry doesn't even turn, and he catches his fist in his hand, and he squeezes his hand, and there's just a sort of, so Jerry is so much more powerful compared to Charlie throughout the whole of the thing. There's even the bits where they're chasing them, Jerry seems to appear in front of them as if
Yeah.
he's so fast. So there's no hope that you have against going against this guy. So I really enjoyed Peter Vincent's character coming into it because it was something for me to latch on to sort of like empathize with.
Yeah, I agree. It's a great character. But Vincent does panic and runs to Charlie's house. And then back at Dandridge's house, Charlie wakes up to find himself locked in a room with Amy, who is now half vampire. And Dandridge leaves a stake for Charlie, giving him a choice to either kill Amy or not and risk getting killed by her when she fully turns in the morning. So this is like what you were saying, where he's like so dismissive of her, you know?
Yeah, does make sense.
So we're back at Charlie's house,
Hmm.
and Vincent is hiding out, and he goes up to Charlie's room, either Charlie's room or his mom's room. I forget where he's
Mom's room, I
in
think.
the mom's room, right? And then he's confronted by a red-wigged evil Ed. Like, why did he need this really like Pollyanna wig? I don't know, but hell yeah, it's fucking awesome.
What I loved about that bit is he reads out the note that Charlie's mum left for him, but it's not even like speaking to Charlie, he's speaking to Peter Vincent. But it's just so it turns the words, which are like, was it like dinner's left in the oven or something? But it turns them so sinister and so sort of hammy. It's great.
Yeah, and it also lets us know that the mom's safe, which
Yeah.
which I'm happy about, right? Peter Vincent runs out of the room and then he falls down trying to get away from him. And then we see this wolf round the corner. And so Evil Ed is turned into a wolf, which does happen in vampire lore, so that's fine.
Hmm.
And then the wolf lunges at Vincent and he defends himself by grabbing a wooden table leg and holding it in front of him while the Evil Ed wolf lunges at him and it basically stabs him in the heart and he falls over the story and falls to the ground. And then he has like the longest, most excruciating death scene that goes on for like 2.5 minutes.
Yeah, it's
It's
really
so
long.
long, but it's so awesome. This transformation scene that we were talking about,
Hmm.
where it's like he's transitioning from the wolf to human, but he kind of like dies halfway. And so he's left as this half human, half wolf thing, and it
Yeah,
looks absolutely fucking amazing. The
it
the, the
does.
effects are great, but then Peter Vincent or I should say Roddy McDowell does a great job of like because it's a 2.5 minute long sequence of this guy dying. Like they're going back and forth between Peter Vincent and and Evil Ed,
Hmm.
and when they go on Peter Vincent, he's like has all this empathy and sympathy for Evil Ed, and like he's almost like crying for him. He's even like reaches out a hand when Ed reaches out a hand. It's so touching, you know. He pulls it back when he realizes what's happening, but I
Yeah,
don't know. I really enjoyed that scene, and it
good
just goes to
acting.
the level of like of the character, how great that character is, and what good of acting both Evil Ed did, and also or not Evil Ed, but I should say Stephen Jeffries, the acting he did, and also the acting that Roddy McDowell did.
Hmm. No, it's you think like there was probably no sound on that set when that was happening. It was just those two going at it, take after take after take. But they were just so committed, you completely believe it, and the special effects work so well. For it was not special effects, but it is kind of its camera work, isn't it? So they would edit it together as he slowly transitions back into sort of a Wolfman thing. It's really well done.
Yeah, yeah, and he had to have like Stephen Jeffries had to have like 12 hours of makeup to get into this thing twice. So they shot it twice for numerous hours. So I could just imagine how
You'd
difficult
probably
that
be
was
asleep getting that put on you if you're going to be
to.
acting at the end of it. You'd probably just be snoring.
Well, Chris Sarandon said I was reading that if it wasn't for like learning to meditate, he would not have. He said he would have gone crazy having to be in the chair for as long because he had to do 8 hours of makeup multiple days for his vampire form. You know,
Mm.
it's like if I wasn't able to meditate, I would have gone crazy. So then Vincent returns to the Dandridge house where he frees Charlie, and they confront Billy again. Vincent shoots him several times with the gun, like 6 times.
Yeah.
Shoots him once in the head, and he falls down. And then it's actually a great scene because he's at the bottom of the steps, and Peter Vincent and Charlie at the top of the steps, and he's like walking up, and you can hear the stairboards. What are they called? The boards,
Staircase.
staircase. You can hear that like noise, is the creaking coming up as he's walking up, but you can't see it
Hmm.
because he's like enveloped in all this fog. And
Hmm.
then he just fully unloads the pistol into him 6 times. He doesn't die, and then he's attacks Peter Vincent, grabs him. He's about to throw him over the railing, but Charlie stops and stabs him with the stake that they had.
Hmm.
And then he just melts.
Yeah, yeah. So what is
So
he? That's my whole thing. The whole thing that was like, what is he the whole time long? Is he a vampire? What is he?
yeah, like he just melts into a gooey mess of blood and green slime.
Hmm.
Um, it's an absolutely amazing sequence. We see like um, the flesh being rendered from his bones, and just like you just see all his bones fall, like his skeletal remains of his face and all that.
Hmm.
I don't care what he was. Nobody knows what he was. Even the director, when questioned for commentaries, was like, "I don't fucking know what he was," but it looks great. Looks
It
absolutely
does.
awesome.
I actually like
Um,
that. I think I like that one more than the wolf transformation because you didn't expect it. That's you didn't expect it of that character to do. You shot the shot in the head, right? He's dead because you think he's just human, you know, and that's the surprise of it. So you don't expect that kind of, and they stay on it for so long. It's great.
yeah, yeah, and I've seen something similar to that before, where like there's just skin melting off of bones, like
Reader's Lost Art.
Raiders of the Lost Ark. Oh yeah, of course. There's another one, the Wax House of Wax, the original one,
Hmm.
and then also Company of Wolves, which is in the '80s as well. So they've done this before, but
Hmm.
it looks amazing and I love it. So then Charlie and Vincent have another confrontation with Dandridge, who is kept at bay with their crucifixes. And this is the one where I was saying that like Dandridge is like, oh, that cross is useless against me. And then he's like, you have to have faith. And then like Peter Vincent like doubles down on his faith in Jesus
Yeah.
Christ. And he's like, and then he's like, oh fuck, you really believe now. And so that stopped him. So but Dandridge then transforms himself into a bat and attacks Peter Vincent, who ends up fending him off with one of Billy's bones, which I thought was fun. It's like a femur bone or something. So then Charlie attempts to help, but is bitten in the arm by Jerry the Bat. So then Peter Vincent manages to move Jer into the sunlight, and in doing so, causes him to make an exit for the basement. So Charlie and Vincent
Hmm.
venture down into the basement to find Dandridge's coffin and attempt to kill him while he's trying to recuperate. Just when they find the coffin, Amy, who's now a fully turned vampire, enters and at first attempts to seduce Charlie, then attacks him, looking like Bruce the shark from Jaws. Like this full, like,
Maw.
yeah, just gaping maw filled with fangs. It looks fucking dope. And it's actually the shot they use in the poster for the
Yeah.
movie,
Yeah.
which I thought it was crazy that they gave up that part of the movie, which is such an more important part for the movie, but I mean, for the poster, but that's what happened.
Though to be fair, in that poster, I couldn't tell whether it was her or not. Like the poster is so attractive. Like that's one of the things that really got me interested in Fright Night because that poster is so iconic with the film. It looks so cool. You just want to see what is going on here.
Yeah. So about this shark mouth. So Tom Holland asked the visual effects person Randall William Cook if he could devise some sort of shark mouth for one of the vampires. But unfortunately, there was neither time nor money left in the budget to create one. But he managed to concoct one over the weekend, but with the proviso or asking that it only be shown on screen for a few seconds. But ultimately, the crudely made mouthpiece was featured extensively in the film, which I thought was pretty funny. It was only supposed to be in for a couple seconds, but when something looks so great like that, and now it's become iconic,
Yeah.
It's amazing. So while Charlie tries to keep her away, Vincent manages to open Jerry Dandridge's coffin and tries to drive his wooden stake through his heart. But Dandridge wakes up and Vincent stabs him, but he misses his heart. The vampire rises from the coffin, pulls out the wooden stake, and breaks it in two. But when he attacks Vincent, Charlie begins smashing in all the basement windows, allowing the sunlight to hit Dandridge. They're also using mirrors to reflect the sunlight, and finally, they manage to kill Dandridge by blasting him with the sun's rays, and he bursts into flames. And within seconds, his body is reduced to dust and bones.
Mhm.
This is like an amazing fireball death scene where he looks like a giant bat monster that's on fire.
Yeah.
Um,
And he sucked out the window.
he sucked it looks amazing. Like I can't say it enough how great the special effects are, the
I do
practical effects are in this
I
movie.
do like the whole film. You sort of like, well, as we said, he's dressed in these lovely suave things, and he looks really pristine and all this stuff. But like the bat thing that you see at the end is kind of like that's what he really looks like, and that's what he's hiding all along. And you just get to see it on flames, and it looks awful, and it's class. So it is. I mean, awful in a good way, if you know what I mean. Awful in
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah,
scary
yeah.
way.
Yeah. So with Jerry Dandridge's death, the still alive Amy is apparently released from his curse and becomes human once again. In the final scene, the movie ends just where it began, with Charlie and Amy back in his room watching a horror movie hosted by Peter Vincent on the TV, who announces that he's dedicating the movie to his friend Charlie for making him believe that vampires are real. The movie is left open ended when Charlie looks out at the Dandridge house next door that's now dark and vacant. He briefly sees a pair of red eyes staring back at him from the darkness. But instead of telling Amy, he decides to let it go and goes back to her for another makeout session on his bed. As the credits roll, the voice of Evil Ed is heard laughing. Oh, you're so cool, Brewster. And then the credits roll. So that was Fright Night from 1985. What did you think?
Um, well, I thought it was good. There was problems. I did have problems with it, as I said, with the Charlie character and that initial kind of scene, and I find it so interesting that as I said, he's sort of an ineffective, and everything he does, he doesn't really achieve much. And you were talking about arcs and stuff like that. Throughout his film, it's the whole arc of him is actually beginning to stop the monster that is Jerry. But every time he's in a confrontation throughout the film, he's just sort of he's so overpowered. Jerry is such, that's an interesting thing about it, and what I liked. The vampire is so incredibly powerful in this film. You're kind of like, what's the point? Jerry is so strong and all this stuff. There's, and there's like, boy, you cried wolf. Indeed, there's this sort of lack of everyone goes through this phase where they don't believe in it, and it's actually what causes them to be at the most harm's way, because he could so easily swat them out of the way then. That's the scene where Peter Vincent goes into the house to test this theory, and it's so funny because he could so easily just slaughter them all right then and there, but then
Yeah.
what would happen to Peter Vincent sort of thing would probably come about. So I liked it. I did like it. But as I say, the Peter Vincent character saved it for me in terms of having a good character to sort of empathize with, because it felt like when Peter Vincent came on the scene, and particularly in the scenes where they go back to the house for the second and third time, he was the dominant force, and Charlie took a backseat in some ways in terms of what the camera was focusing on. And Charlie sort of only then came on when he sort of smashed in the glass in the basement.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Like, I think the character of Charlie is completely outclassed by Jerry, by Peter, by Evil Ed, and even by Amy. Like, Charlie is the least interesting character in this movie. And,
Yeah,
you don't see that too often in like horror movies where your main character is the least interesting person. And I guess you could say like he's a final girl, but also Amy's a final girl, and Peter Vincent's a final girl. Like, I don't know. I enjoyed everything. What I was going to say earlier, what I wanted to save till now, is that I've seen this movie once before, and I remember it being fine. It didn't make much of an impression on me. I'm not much for vampire movies, but I definitely like some of them, or I like a lot of them, but it's just not a genre I return to. But this time, watching it this time, I was like blown away by how much I liked this film. I love this film. Like it was a lot of fun to watch. It was a classic '80s like special effects horror movie bonanza. Like it was great. Um, it's just a lot of fun to watch. You don't think of a lot of horror movies that are just fun to watch that were also a little bit like they weren't trying to be funny. Like
No,
this, I don't know. This isn't a horror comedy. It's a horror film with comedic elements that worked really well.
yeah.
You know. So
I,
yeah, I really enjoyed this movie.
I like this the sort of like it felt like it was filmed on the same set as The Burbs. I love that, as I said, the '80s aesthetic and sort of thing, and I love the premise of it. You know, this kid who's just going through his life, and his biggest goal in the world is sort of seducing his girlfriend, and then there's a vampire next door, and nobody believes him. Of course, nobody believes him because it sounds insane. So yeah, you know, I think that's fantastic, but I still don't think that for me the premise of the film is fully realized to like 100%, even in this version or the 2011 version. I think there's another version of this film that would be like 5 stars for me, because I love the idea of it, but I
Uh-huh.
just I don't, and that's why I say I think like if I saw this film when I was a kid, I'd like it more or love it more. But
Uh-huh.
just for me, I liked it, but I didn't love it.
Yeah, and I do like. I see what you're saying there, but or not, but you were talking earlier about like you had Alfred Hitchcock as a horror host, and Alfred Hitchcock Presents. And this movie had elements of Rear Window. Right?
Yeah,
Have you seen Rear Window?
yeah, I love that film.
Yeah, and so I love the different take on it's Rear Window meets what's
Dracula,
yeah, Dracula, or the Stephen King film.
Salem's
Um,
Lot.
yeah, Salem's Lot. It's like Rear Window meets Salem's Lot, and the director even said that he took a lot of inspiration from Salem's Lot for this movie
Hmm.
when he wrote it. But yeah, all around, it's just a great movie that I really enjoyed. So, Jamie, what we typically do here now is we rate the movie based on 5 upside down crosses. One being the least amount and 5 being the most amount, and it just depends on what how you felt right now or the day that you watched it. It changes from day to day. It can change depending on who you watch it or your mood, but just
Hmm.
in general, what would you give this movie? How many upside down crosses would you give Fright Night from 1985?
I feel a lot of people are going to be angry at me, but I'm going to give it 3 upside down
Three.
crosses. Yeah,
Okay,
you know,
three's a solid film.
mhm.
Three's like a B.
Yeah. No, I liked it. I liked it. I just didn't love it, if you know what I mean. And
Uh-huh.
maybe that's the thing we talked about. Maybe it's fast paced. It's so fast paced in the first kind of act that you don't really get you don't really get a handle of who Amy is, and you don't really get an idea of who Charlie is. You don't really get an idea of Charlie's mum. You know, a single parent, that's never really explained. Like, you know, are they divorced or what's happened? Where's the father, sort of thing. Not the, and you would just like those things not for to know them, but to get deeper into the characters. Ed, he stands out because he's so sort of riotous and sarcastic. His character just comes out and shines through quick. But those other characters, because like Charlie's playing the straight guy, straight man role, they take a little bit longer to get a sort of feel for it, and I just didn't get a feel for his character at all until he's just sort of reacting to the events of, you know, vampirism and things like that.
I'm between a 3.5 and 4 upside down crosses here.
Mm.
I don't know what it was. It was maybe I was having a really great day, but I just love this movie. I think I'm gonna give it 4 upside down crosses, and I'll tell you why. There's I was while researching this, I found that the cast was really upset that they hadn't had the opportunity to do commentaries for the DVD. So
Mm-hmm.
they got together on their own and did these radio or these bootleg commentaries for the movie, and they released them online for free so that fans could just watch the movie and listen to their commentary
Cool.
for free.
That sounds
And then
awesome.
and that ended up being released on the Blu-ray release that was just within the last couple of years. So I'm gonna definitely be looking into that because I want to listen to that commentary. So then, what we do here is, in order to be fully absolved from your horror movie sin, I will be I will be suggesting 3 movies to you to watch that are similar in tone to the movie, and then you would need to watch them or burn in the fiery pits of hell. That's your
That's
that's
my
your
choice.
choice, not mine. So, all right, Jamie. So for the 3 movies that I'll be assigning to you, I would say Obviously, we're going to do Fright Night Part 2 from 1988. I haven't seen this one either. I'm really looking forward to seeing where the story picks up. Apparently, it starts 3 years after the original came out. And then I would say Vampires from 1998, directed, of course, by one of my favorite directors, John Carpenter. And then we have Ginger Snaps from 2000, which is a horror movie coming of age tale about two outcast sisters. And so I think you're really going to enjoy all those three movies. I think they really go well with the kind of theme and the feel of Fright Night.
Cool. I will enjoy completing the assignment.
All right, so Jamie, if you could please let my listeners know where they can follow you, where they can buy your books, how they can support you in any way.
You can find me on Instagram at jamie.stewart.33. My books are all available on Amazon. Some of them are short stories, so they're only like 99p, and then some of them are collected into books, and there's obviously novels and novellas there. And you can support me anyway by reviewing, reading, buying anything that I write, and come onto my Instagram page and just engaging with me. I'm completely open to anyone having a chat about books. Don't have to be mine. I got into this first as a reader because I love shouting about horror books, and I just love chatting about them. So,
well, yeah, Jamie, it's been, you've been an absolute blast to have a conversation with. So thank you so much for coming onto the show. I really appreciate it. I hope you had fun.
I did. I had fun. It's a great idea you got going here. I love it. So, definitely, I would recommend it to many of my friends. So, and yeah, it's great.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So if you'd like to follow me, you can follow me on Twitter at MHCPod, like My Horror Confessional Pod. You can follow me on Instagram at My Horror Confessional. If you'd like to email the show, you can email me at myhorrorconfessional@gmail.com. The music was done by Taylor Fox. You can follow her on Instagram at the Taylor Fox. And the artwork was done by my good friend Cap Mikey. You can follow him on Instagram at Cap'n_Mikey_arts. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.